Nvidia, is this the greatest company in the world, and can they keep up the growth?
I think so. You know, I briefly shorted the stock last night because just for a trade, I think that the quarter wasn't as good as I thought it would be. But I think that Nvidia has three kind of major advantages that will just propagate it to 10 trillion market cap. Why I'm shorting it, again, I just wanted an instant reaction to the quarter. Very, very, very small position. Think thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars. And, you know, so just like maybe it'll go down for 5 minutes kind of thing. And we all know that even cheap stocks will sometimes like digest a quarter that kind of like is pretty sloppy. This is a bit of a sloppy quarter. But the three big things for Nvidia are you have AGI, which in essence is going to require huge amounts of compute. Claude was down yesterday. We're big Claude users over here. As much as I hate to admit it, I don't like the people at the company, but they have great software. We use Claude, and the demand was so high for their latest model, the company couldn't serve it. They crashed. They have to rate limit it. You know, there is no limit to the amount of intelligence people want. And that's why Palantir is, you know, such a good long. It turns out that people thought this would be a bad quarter, and they put in an okay quarter.
Especially ex-China.
Yeah, that's sort of, you know, a mess, and it's hard to interpret, you know, are they telling the truth? Is China really that, you know, big of a business for them? Why can't China just get these chips from somewhere else? It's tough to digest. But if you zoom out, forget the shenanigans of like the machinations of like the near-term quarter stuff, which is, you know, on Wall Street, it's a game in essence of it's a poker game of who's positioned where, and like, is Fidelity going to sell? Is this good? You're basically asking, was this quarter good enough for Fidelity? Fidelity is the biggest, you know, it's the biggest mutual fund that actively manages their portfolio. Right. So it's like, what's Fidelity going to do on this quarter? It has nothing to do with what you think. It's all about what are the big market players going to do. So zooming out from that, you know, those near-term shenanigans, the three big things, I mean, AGI is basically every single person is going to have AGI, and it's going to make Nvidia $100,000 per person. It's going to be so productive that you basically, every human being is going to have a chip allocated to them practically for this new form of intelligence. And it's going to be, you know, really cost effective. You know, you're going to get multiples of that in productivity. The second big thing is autonomous vehicles. This is happening. You know, the cars are driving themselves, and that's not going to stop. And these things need NVIDIA. I did a tour of Waymo. Some Waymo engineers were kind enough to give me a tour. You know, they work great. They're expanding to every city. Elon's dropping them too. These all run on AI. They are AI machines on wheels, and they cannot work without AI. So it's a huge thing for NVIDIA. And you're talking about saving lives, quite frankly, and changing the face of transportation. So that's not, I think, in the stock price at all. And then the third thing is robotics. You know, this is like the be all end all. Elon's betting his life, his legacy, basically, on robotics. And he's saying there's going to be more robots than humans. He's not kidding. You know, he really thinks that. If you want to be amazed, I mean, we've seen some cool robot stuff, but look at Figure AI, Figure.ai. They're making really nice humanoid robots. Valuation's $50 billion. This is the biggest TAM as well that exists. Yep. Human labor can be automated. And, you know, are these machines truly generalizable? Can they really do anything? We don't know. But one of the things we could say that Sam Altman likes to say about AI, for at least for LLMs, is this is the worst it'll ever be. Right. You know, that's kind of, you know, amazing if you think about it. Now, we don't, you know, robotics is one of these crapshoots, but clearly Tesla stock, probably about half of it is robotics valuation. And we just trust Elon, and, you know, he'll figure it out. Some people think robotics is a fraud, and it suffers from too many dimensions of freedom where the machine just won't be able to be like us. I disagree. I think that we have synthetic training data at this point where these machines can actually do anything. And I think various companies, including OpenAI and others, are going to start betting very heavily and more publicly that robotics is the future. When are we going to see machines out in the wild? When are you going to walk across the street and look to your left and it's a robot walking across the street with you, or you know, robots going to buy groceries or something? It's going to happen. That's the world we're going to live in. 1998, Elon Musk is on a listserv. Listservs don't exist anymore. It's a mailing list for crypto cypherpunks. And if you look through this mailing list, it's fascinating. He's sitting there posting about, you know, this stuff 10 years before Satoshi. And okay, cool. PayPal, co-founder. He's talking about digital money, sending money around the world before anybody's talking about it. Tesla, first guy to autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. A lot of people forget. OpenAI, he's the co-founder.
Yeah,
he was there too. SpaceX, first guy to do satellites cheaply. The guy's Neuralink, you know, and now robotics. He's telling you this is going to be the biggest thing Tesla's ever done.
Do you think Tesla's overvalued?
What's that?
You think Tesla's overvalued? No.
It's just like Palantir. It's the 𝗙𝗏𝗘𝗍𝑢 guy says, oh my God, it's such a short. It's so obvious. Look at the cash flow deteriorating, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, okay, value the car business, put it aside. Now value the cyber taxi business, put that aside. You know, basically it's an old dodgy company. That's all business. Sorry, Elon. That's kind of there. And maybe that's worth 200 billion. Toyota's worth 200 billion.
Right.
Cool. And maybe he can make that grow. I don't know. But that's the conservative assumption. What would the best cyber taxi startup be worth? Well, Waymo's worth 50, but Waymo doesn't have Elon. So maybe, and they're not a car company at all, right? So maybe that's 100. So that's robotaxis. Now, how about autonomous? It's slightly different from robotaxis. How about some of the new cars they're going to make? You have to value each of these as a sort of a separate business. And then finally, robotics you have to value. And robotics, you know, would I pay 500 billion for a robot startup? Probably not. But the market is sort of as a sum of parts. I forget all the parts, quite frankly, right now. But I did a sum of parts analysis, and it's sort of fairly valued to me, unless robots is even bigger than we think, which it might be. I mean, that's what you're betting on. And if the greatest, I mean, I'm telling you, go to 1998. Elon's 20-something years old, and he's posting about cryptocurrency 10 years before it happens. This guy can tell the future. I don't know how, but he can tell the future. And the VCs I talk to, Mark Andreessen or Peter Thiel, they all tell you, don't bet against Elon. You know, he is that guy. He can tell that robots are going to be the future. Then robots are going to be the future. And, you know, how big they're going to get is another question. But conceivably, we could all have a robot each. And again, powered by NVIDIA. They have to be powered by AI. And, you know, whether Tesla uses NVIDIA or not, I don't think is that important, because as much as Tesla will try, they won't have 100% market share. Right. You know, there'll be other companies. Probably Tesla will still use NVIDIA, but even if they don't, you know, the other companies will. So you got three huge things that NVIDIA, you basically have to use NVIDIA to power the future. All of the future is based on intelligence being digital, and it all has to go through NVIDIA, which is crazy if you think about it. You know, somebody else should be able to make money on this, but they just have it locked in. And that's why I think NVIDIA is going to be the first $10 trillion company.
Do you think Elon's attempt at DOGE was meaningful, or it was a waste of time?
I think he learned what a lot of people learn. You know, in the hedge fund world, you meet a lot of rich people who get bored. I'd even put Vivek in that category. I love Vivek. Yeah, consider him a friend, but like you sort of, you know, you did your thing in business, you made a lot of money, and you say, what's next? Bloomberg did this, et cetera. What most of these guys find is they step one day in politics and they say, oh, no, I don't want this. Because, you know, and I've seen this story play out maybe 100 times. You know, you make however much money, you decide, you know, you want to see what politics is like, and you never go back. And 5% of those people like it, and they figure it out, and they make it work, you know, the Bloombergs of the world. But most people say, this isn't real life. Like, I cannot do this, you know, because it is mostly people who are, you know, pretty slimy, and they're not telling you the truth. They're duplicitous. They're, you know, it's very much an optics game and perception. And, you know, you have these slick people that are not worried about actually executing, which business people do. They're much more worried about, you know, propagating their image.
Yeah, getting reelected.
Yeah, that's it. You know, and I think he learned the hard way. And now it seems like that relationship is fracturing. He said yesterday he was disappointed in Trump's budget, that it was so much spending. You know, it seems like they're headed for a divorce. But, you know, I think that, you know, Trump also is such an iconoclast trying to get into the system and change it. And even he can't change it. It's so hard to make that system change. So business people just get annoyed at this, and they realize that you have to think about politics on a 30, 40-year time scale. They're used to changing stuff in 3 or 4 days. Elon's 3 or 4 minutes. If you don't respond to me, you're fired. You know, right. So I think that, you know, it's not hard. It's not a surprise that he's, you know, sort of saying, I thought I could do X, Y, and Z. It turns out the court stopped me. Thought I could do X, Y, and Z. Turns out some Republican senator who has a power card to play, you know, can, you know, kill this whole thing.
Robinhood, Vlad Tenev. I bought a lot of call options on the stock when it was $8. It was one of the biggest wins I've had in the market from an options perspective. $60. Is Robinhood the future of finance? How do you think of this company?
I do think it's the future of finance. I compete with them. I talked to Vlad about doing something with my product. You know, the guy's just a genius. You know, he figured out that there's huge untapped potential in brokerage. You know, I can't say I love every single thing he does. You know, I think he has gamified the market a little bit. But, you know, I think he's going to build the next big financial institution. You know, I would not be surprised if he built a $200-300 billion company that was bigger than Goldman Sachs. Wow. You know, if you look into Vlad's history, this isn't a guy to bet against. And when you see a guy like this, who's him's kind of reminds me a little bit of this too. When you see really talented managers, it took me 25 years of investing and beating my head against the wall sometimes to learn some of these lessons. So I hope some of you guys will avoid those 25 years of pain that I had. You know, when you see a great manager managing a business and it's just growing and growing, I think you just buy and forget about it, and you just let them compound, especially if they have a big open vision. And the big open vision here is finance could be more digital, finance could be more inclusive, finance could look different, and I'm going to make the next Goldman Sachs or the next JP Morgan, and he's doing it. And you just watch and enjoy. You know, like you know, is he going to be a perfect straight line up? Probably not, but you know, you have to be amazed at this guy. Like same thing with HIMS. Anybody can make like a little telehealth app tomorrow, a little prescription app tomorrow. Like you can spin one up tonight. It's a big difference to make it a $10 billion company. And in Robinhood's case, he's at 60 billion now. I mean, you have to give credit where credit's due. And you know, clearly he's onto something. Now, does that mean the ride lasts forever? You know, if you look at Palantir, you look at Robinhood and you say, these guys are so good. Tesla even, you know, how much can these guys compound and when will it stop? And look, the reality is it does stop at some point. CEOs get rich. They decide, you know, maybe I'm bored. Maybe I'm going to have 65 kids. Maybe I'm kidding, but maybe, you know, maybe I'm not going to be so interested in this. And one sign, if you want to be vicious, and I think sometimes you have to be in this business, Vlad started a second company recently. And I had investors a long time ago who said, Martin, if you ever do something like that, we're taking all our money out. If you ever even get a girlfriend or get married, we have a problem because you're supposed to be managing our money. Not.
Do you think there could be a symbiotic relationship because it's an AI company? Robinhood's doing AI. Maybe that's
looks like a distraction to me. I mean, he's a mathematician. He loves math. So do I. But so that's it. You know, he'll probably be fine. But when you look at these telltale signs, like, what are you doing? You know, right? And you just have to watch it carefully because even the best CEOs, they fall off the horse. And you know, I guess what I'm saying is, when you trust and believe so much in the Karps and the Musks and the Tenevs, you do have to sit there and sort of say, well, trust but verify. You know, right. I bet on you and I believe in you, but you know, watch the quarters, watch the things they do, and if you ever get uncomfortable, just hit the sell button. You know, it's not that hard. You know, I think the biggest mistake I see individual investors make is they get married. They just can't ever hit the sell button. We have a guy in our chat, he's named Alejandro. We call him Bag-Alejandro because he's a bag holder. He's up so much on IonQ. He just can't hit sell for some reason. And it's like, look, man, you doubled your money. I lost 2 or 3 million on this. Just hit the sell button. You know, but you know, for whatever reason, every time it goes up, he invents a new reason to be long. And, you know, it's a symptom that a lot of people have. And there's nothing offending about selling. You know, you don't get points in the stock market for being loyal. You know, do you get loyalty points? People say they're proud. They say, I've owned Palantir since this price. I've owned Palantir since this year. But you don't get extra stock for that. No, Alex Karp doesn't send you a Christmas card for that. Your job is to protect your portfolio. And if you start to see Karp's acting weird and the numbers aren't as good as I thought they'd be, you just sell. You know, it's not going to kill you. Find the next Palantir. You know, a lot of people spend all of their energy on the portfolio they have now. Yeah. You should be spending a lot of energy on the portfolio of stocks that you don't know about that could be the next Palantir. You know, go worry about, you know, just constantly scrutinizing these stocks. You made your bet. You already have Palantir. Why study it? And
investing is ruthless. You've got to be able to compound and find the next one. HIMS. You went on the HIMS House podcast. I've been on that podcast. There's a big cult following on this one. Are you long HIMS?
I'm not long. I was long when I was on the podcast. Then it doubled or something like that. And I sold it. I even shorted it briefly. And I shorted HIMS and bought Palantir as a pair trade. Because HIMS had this like so-so quarter. and Palantir had this killer quarter.
Yeah.
And HIMSS went up 20% on the quarter, and Palantir's flat on the quarter. And I was like, hold on, this is gonna reverse, and it reversed. So I do trade sometimes. I put the trader hat on, but when I put the investor hat on, I mean, this is obviously a management team that knows what they're doing. I mean, this TAM is also kind of infinite. I mean, healthcare is full of broken to fix, and one of the first broken things to fix was, why can't I just get a prescription for the drug I want? And the answer is, well, doctors have to decide first. And the reality is, yes, look, I wouldn't want you to do surgery on me, brain surgery on me, Amit, but I do think that, I can fill my own prescription for birth control if you're a woman and you want birth control. What's the big deal? Everybody knows, everybody takes these drugs. Like, it's really not that serious. Cholesterol medicine. I mean, you don't need a doc for every single thing. And I think when you go to the doctor, it tends to create, oh, well, you have to do a blood draw. Oh, well, blood draw had this. Well, we're going to have to biopsy that. And it's this constant back and forth of you overutilizing healthcare. They have a check and balance there in a teledoctor, checking and making sure. But the reality is we spend way too much on healthcare. It's bankrupting our country. And HIMSS is, odd as it sounds, it's sort of an attempt to sort of fix some of that, as well as providing people satisfactory service. I hate going to the doctor to renew my script. The doctor says, I'm not going to renew the script unless you come in, and I want to make sure that, these are the drugs I still want to prescribe. And there's a reason he's doing that. It's not for, fun or safety. It's because he gets money doing that, and he can build his practice up. And, HIMSS is kind of a challenge to the healthcare system of saying, let's do things differently. And
do you think they have a moat?
I don't think they need one. I think that, moat is a funny word. I had a bunch of friends at American Express who were investors with me that Buffett was a big investor in American Express, and Buffett visited Amex. And this is like an off the cuff, unrecorded kind of like chat. And Buffett's done a lot of these. And if you collect little tidbits you hear from people, it's kind of fascinating what he's not said publicly. And for moats, he said, you guys have a moat, but what's a moat? He said, moat is when the customer uses a different part of their brain to buy the product. Right. What does that mean? Well, the part of my brain that buys the product, when I look at, a software service, I look at the price and I sort of say, I don't know, is this worth it to me? Do I want to pay $9.99 a month for it? When you see the Gucci hat and you say, I need that. I don't care what the price. What's the price? You're already at the checkout and you look at the price. You need it. I don't care about fashion myself, but the point is, there's a different part of your brain that's operating. And I think HIMSS, it's tricky. On one hand, it's kind of a different part of your brain, but on the other hand, it's not. I think that their brand name is very valuable. People know HIMSS, they trust it. But on the other hand, somebody else could erode it over time. Their job is to build it and get it to a point where nobody can do that, and they make a fortress. So far, they've done well. We know HIMSS, there's Row, but like the amount.
But you don't like it at 55.
It's okay. Yeah, I think it's okay. I think it's actually kind of cheap too, because they're actually growing cash flow really fast. But all of Wall Street's really pessimistic because no moat. What's going to happen after GLPs, et cetera. But if you just take a step back and say, does this management? They've grown sales. So what's amazing about these kids is they're really young. Look at revenue 5-6 years ago. They barely had any. They have $2 billion in revenue now. Yeah. They went from like 50 in revenue to $2 billion. Who does that? Can you do that? Can I do that? I've never done that. I made a $2 billion company. We never went from standing start to $2 billion in revenue. Holy moly. Who does that? It just shows you that these people know what they're doing. Now, again, you got to watch it like a hawk, but unlike Palantir, and Tesla and even Robinhood, baby, the valuation on HIMSS is quite reasonable. The price to cash flow is like 20 times. It's really not, some wild number. Now, Wall Street, the bears on Wall Street think that cash flow is about to collapse. Right. GLP and so forth. I don't know for sure. It does. I would argue it's just as likely it doubles, but it's one of these stocks that's like, it's tricky. I wish everything were cut clear. Very, very clear longs. I mean, it could be rocky if the deal they have with Novo is a little complicated. Selling GLPs kind of under the table isn't exactly a great business to be in, right. But they will figure out the next thing and the next thing and the next thing because they're HIMSS. They always seem to figure it out. And healthcare is such a big space that, he's literally told you by 2030, we're going to be 6 billion. And it's not because he's guessing, he's got a plan, and look at the plan. Imagine being the Series A investor. Kid comes to you and says, yeah, 50 million valuation. How much business do you have? Well, a couple million in pharmacy sales. And you're like, okay, well, we'll see. And then 6 billion in revenue. I mean, unbelievable success. I think he's probably going to beat the 6 billion. But again, is now the time? Is today the time? Your strategy wise, it's probably along. I think it probably belongs in most portfolios, but it's not to say it's riskless. Nothing is riskless.
MicroStrategy, Bitcoin. General thoughts. Does this explode?
Yeah, so one of my big hobbies is cracking Bitcoin, trying to. It's led me down a lot of really interesting roads. I think Satoshi's tokens on this is very technical, the P2PK script, the original P2PK, not P2PKH or Taproot or SegWit, those tokens, which are about 9% of Bitcoin, they will be hacked. Now, whether it's me that does it or not, we'll see. But
wait, why are you so confident that they're going to be hacked?
The public key is shown on those tokens. You need to calculate, which is impossible, most people say, and a normal 99% of me agrees. 1% still going to try. The public key of the ECC curve is 256 bits, so it's 256 ones and zeros, or about 77 digits. That public key matches a 77-digit private key. If you guess this private key, you win. Every other Bitcoin, the other 91%, they don't show you the private key. So you don't even know what the number is to guess. But you have the number here. You just don't know how to go from one way to the other. Now, it's very hard, but quantum computers can do this very easily. There's no such thing as a quantum computer yet that can do it. But, in 10 years, when we can do this magic number trick, we can turn this one number to this other number. That's the one thing I do concede quantum computers could do. Again, don't know if it's 10 years, don't know if it's 20 or 30, but no matter what, the people at the Bitcoin Foundation and who control the GitHub repo, no matter what they do, they cannot stop these tokens unless they blacklist them, which they can do. That's the only saving grace. They can say, we're deleting Satoshi's tokens. He's dead. The problem with that is that, what does it say to the rest of the Bitcoin market?
Yeah.
It's like, maybe you could delete your tokens too. And I don't think that's good. So if they leave Satoshi's tokens there, it's 9% of the supply that's inevitably going somewhere, probably to the first guy with a quantum computer that figures it out. Maybe the guy that's using all the quantum computer time on the clouds right now. But regardless, it'll be cracked someday. I think that is very obvious. Even the people knee deep in this on the Bitcoin board or the Bitcoin community acknowledge this. And I don't know what you do about. Imagine you had a stock where you knew 9% of the stock was going to be sold.
Right.
It could be one of these things where you say, well, if they sell it in an orderly way, or maybe they burn it.
Right.
They could do it in a, if they burned it, they'd be burning $100 billion. I don't know who wants to do that.
Do you think Bitcoin is a hedge against money printing? Do you believe in that?
Yeah, it is. And I hate to say it because I thought Trump was going to be a bearish thing for Bitcoin because Trump was supposed to basically Bitcoin is an asset that was born in crisis. In the blockchain, inscribed in it is the financial crisis, right? It's the newspaper of the banks failing. Right. And Satoshi was clearly telling you in only so many words that how do you trust people to organize a monetary system? You can't. They're going to print money. They're going to do political things. We need something that is beyond the AOCs and even quite frankly, sometimes the Trumps of the world. If they're going to print all this money, we need something else. So he told you that. So Trump was supposed to come in, cut the deficit, cut the spending, and also Bitcoin was born in crisis in a time of invasion of privacy and censorship and anti-money laundering laws and know your client laws and all this stuff that gums the financial system. Bitcoin doesn't have any of that. So Trump was supposed to cut that, stop the surveillance state. None of that's happening. So Bitcoin is still needed. They're still being censored. People are still being kicked out of bank accounts. Inflation is rampant. The need for Bitcoin still exists. I thought Trump would come in and people would say, well, why do we need cryptocurrency? What good is it for? The government's not spying on me anymore. Inflation's been tamed. We've tamed that beast. Right. Budget's going back to normal. But no, actually things seem like they're worse. It seems like the US is going to go bankrupt. It seems like inflation isn't going anywhere. It seems like civil liberties. Look, I'm a Republican, but you have to call a spade a spade. Trump's not exactly, Mr. Civil Liberties. That's the kind of time where you want Bitcoin. Because if we have to reorder the entire financial system of the world, as much as I think Bitcoin's kind of silly, it's a good place to start. If you are going to reorder the financial system of the world, it is widely distributed already.
Apple.
It's a tough one. He's a very different kind of manager, Cook. He's sort of this like ruthless executor, but the company's lost its magic, obviously. It's probably one of these stocks where there's nothing to do. Could they make something big work? Yes. Is AI going to lift their boat just because? Yeah. They're really good at chips. That's the one thing that's super impressive about them. It's shocking. You never would have thought, they'd be this good at chips. And that's kind of one of the things that could save them. But it does feel like Apple's tired. It's just as tired as Microsoft was at the Microsoft peak, where it was like people didn't like the evil empire of Microsoft, and at least on the consumer side. And
do you think Apple could be a healthcare play in a real way? No,
they don't have the focus. To be really good at this, you need somebody who's just a killer executive that's going to be really well compensated and is going to smash everything. And these bigger companies, they're just too DEI-ified, and you can't make something like that work at Apple. I think it has to come from outside. And you can see what have they innovated on? They flopped on Vision Pro. AirPods is okay, but in general, this company hasn't done something new in 20 years almost.
Do you think XRP is a scam?
I do. It doesn't do anything. Nobody uses it. I think that Bitcoin is a lot like that too, but it's more Lindy for one. There's a greater, it's a widely distributed thing. I have a friend who owns over $1 billion of Bitcoin, and he's a famous entrepreneur. We actually mentioned his name in this podcast at one point. I love Bitcoin in one part of my mind. In the other part of my mind, I agree with Warren Buffett. It's nothing. It's like old, crappy database, hard to update, hard to maintain. And I think one of the bearish things for Bitcoin, just to put a bow on this, is interesting, is when people figure out that those Satoshi tokens are gone, it's a big bearish catalyst, because it's not so much that the tokens get sold. Yes, they might cause a panic sale or whatever. It'll bounce back from that. Even if they sell it to $1, they're going to walk it right back up. The bigger problem is that Satoshi is the mythology. The mythos of Bitcoin is a big part of it. Here's this mystery man that drops money, the new money on us, and disappears. He doesn't even sell his own tokens. He just drops 100 billion too and says, I don't need it. Maybe he's dead, maybe he's not. Point is, when elliptic curve cryptography and Shor's algorithm that cracks it, that existed at the time Satoshi wrote Bitcoin. Shor's algorithm goes back to the 90s. He should have known this was a problem. He left these Bitcoin there anyway. So the more we crack the Satoshi myth, that he was this mythological god, and more realize that he was just a dude, he was a programmer, and he made mistakes, that maybe it becomes one of these things that was like, why are we all kind of putting trillions of dollars in the whole financial system on this code that we can't update, that has flaws? And what happens if another computer, a probabilistic computer, a thermodynamic computer, whatever kind of computer we don't even think about, what if that cracks the rest of the 91% of Bitcoin? What do we do then? Do we just censor the Bitcoin we don't like? It's not the perfect system at all. And, but it's hard to crack the mythology of it. That's what keeps a bunch of it going. That's what keeps the people evangelizing it. The crazy people, I think Saylor's nuts. I think he's basically manic. I think he's not sober in terms of his attitude. I don't know about his personal life, but he just is so drunk on Bitcoin. He's literally
but what you call drunk, people would call conviction.
No, I have conviction and stuff, but I think that part of conviction is acknowledging, the downside. And, there's no perfect investment. And, I think it's really disingenuous for him to tell the people that there's no late time to buy Bitcoin. The 100,000x is over, man. We're never getting that again. If Bitcoin took over the entire financial system, it's maybe a 10x. So, it's a bit silly to sort of say, you got to get in Bitcoin. What you're trying to get people to mark up your position is what you're trying to do. And you don't see him sitting there saying, let's put Bitcoin in payments, because it can't be used in payments.
Yeah.
He's not, so to me, I think Saylor's a bit of a charlatan. Again, I appreciate his evangelism of Bitcoin, but it seems like this is more of a pump and dump for him than not a dump, just a pump and pump. For him more than it is anything else.
Meta, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, Tesla, Microsoft, Apple. If you had to pick one Mag 7 over the next decade, what is the one you go long on? And you can't own the other 6.
Okay, so it's definitely not Apple. Probably not Google. I want to put Meta and Nvidia on the maybe side. Probably not Amazon. Do I got them all? Microsoft. Probably not Microsoft. So it's between Meta and Nvidia.
So you have a lot of respect for Zucks.
I do. I think he's the beast. I was talking to Barron Trump about. Barron was like glazing Elon. He was like, Elon's the best. Da, da, da. And I said, don't sleep on Zuck. He's like, no, we don't. I said, don't sleep on Zuck. You know, he's just as good as Elon or better. You know, he's an absolute unit. And, you know, we don't know what Zuck has planned for us anytime soon. But, you know, he's got a bunch of cool stuff. I don't know which part of it and what will work. I don't know. But he's still young and he's still hungry, and it's clear he's one of the best ever. And so,
what about Tesla? Is Tesla on that list of? No.
It's just that. Okay, I'll tell you a really quick story. So there was a guy named Al Mann. He passed away. He created the first insulin pump and then the first cochlear implant. Brilliant guy. Made billions. Then he was making the first inhaled insulin, and this was like early in my career. I fought him. He almost actually physically tried to beat me up. He was 82. It was that bad, the short versus the founder.
Right.
And Al Mann, he's like, don't you know who I am? I'm this guy, that guy. He was the Elon Musk of medtech. And his last gasp was to do inhaled insulin. He was wrong. I was right. I took him down. He forever blamed me for beating his company up and defeating it. He died having wasted his last few billions on this dream. In the scheme of things, the guy was a brilliant guy and a wonderful guy. But he also, you know, for whatever reason, decided to put all of his money behind a bad idea. I can't for certain say if Elon's going to be right or wrong. And that's the mystery of the markets, right? You know, on one hand, I think he's probably going to be right. But on the other hand, Nvidia gets paid if he's right. And Nvidia kind of gets paid no matter what. So we don't know. You just don't know if you're about to be the next Al Mann. There are people that their first company works, the second company works, third company works, fourth company makes them broke. It happens all the time. I'm not saying that's going to happen to Elon. I think he's great, but I don't know him. I don't sit down with him every day. I don't know what he's doing day to day. I don't know if he's lost his mind or not. No clue. Do you? We don't know. So we only can watch what he's doing, and even there we just get imperfect information. You know, so you're betting big. Basically, half of Tesla is this leverage bet on robotics. I don't know if the future is going to be robotics. He's telling you it's going to be. But again, Al Mann told me inhaled insulin was going to be the biggest thing ever. Nobody was going to inject insulin ever again.
Right.
You know, I said no, and I was right. And, you know, the guy had billions of dollars. I had millions of dollars. And, you know, some of his money became my money. And it's one of these things where, you know, just because there's a big upside potential risk doesn't mean you have to take it. You know, you can still respect. I mean, he's probably going to do it. But I'd like to, if I can get my cake and eat it too. So if I can see the robots coming out and the revenues grow, and then I can buy, and it's the price, if the market blesses me by giving me the opportunity to still buy at a good price, then I'm all in. Right. But, you know, sometimes the market, Mr. Market, shouts at you a really good price. And sometimes he doesn't. I may never get that chance on Tesla. But the stars just might align where the robots, like, let's say people start losing faith in us. The robots aren't coming, whatever it is. And you could buy Tesla for 10 times earnings in a recession. And then you see that the robots are coming and you see it is real. Then you go all in. So like now this price at this risk profile, I still would be long, but in that panoply of companies, you know, maybe Nvidia better, you know, maybe I'd say Tesla's number 3. So I put Nvidia, Meta, and then Tesla. And then maybe Microsoft, and then Amazon, and then Apple.